Okay, so thanks to everybody for being here today. I am Karen Weaver, and I'm the manager of the Barnes Fund. We are going to talk today about round 14, special funding round for permanent supportive housing and deeply affordable housing for folks that are at the 30% and below area median income. So that's our goal today. I'm going to, in just a minute, we're going to do introductions first, and then after that, I'll start the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint and the recording of this session will be available on the Barnes website. And that'll be available very soon after we finish this call. And I think that's all the housekeeping I've got. So this morning, let me have folks introduce themselves, and we're going to start with the folks on the staff side. So Rashida, would you start us off?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rashida Pardue, and I work with Karen on the Barnes Fund.
And then I didn't look to see if James was on. It doesn't look like he is. So Allison, let me start with you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Cantway. I'm the Assistant Director of Planning and Research with the Metro Office of Homeless Services.
Awesome. Dr. Trotter?
Hi, Marvin Trotter with the Office of Homeless Services. I serve as the Assistant Director of Programs. I work alongside with Ms. Cantway.
Excellent. Is there anybody else on from OHS? I think so. All right. Let's see. Ryan, let's start with you on the potential grantee side.
My name is Ryan Samuel with AGB Real Estate. We are currently leasing up our Wallace Studios development, which, thanks to OHS and MDHA, is going great, and we are very excited to continue our partnership with a future project that will hopefully be funded by some of this this money.
Sounds great. Adam, would you go next?
Hi guys, I'm Ryan's business partner. I live here in Nashville and have been part of the Nashville community for well over 20 years. So this is our first Barnes Fund application process, so we're just wanting to learn as much as possible. So thank you.
Great. Great. Carissa Pearlstone?
Hi, my name is Carissa Pearlstone. I am with Omni Family Foundation, and we are the nonprofit collaborating with Adam and Ryan.
Great. Raven?
The Tennessee Alliance for Economic Mobility. My job title is Transportation and Housing Navigation Manager.
Great. Thank you. Rebecca?
Rebecca Mize, LDG Development.
Super. And then I also have a phone number here, 716-9 something. So
that's me too. I'm sorry. I'm dialed into my phone and the computer.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. No worries. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen.
Was it correct, and did I hear that everybody was basically with Adam and his business partner?
Yeah.
Oh no, and I'm only asking because I think they understand a lot from our office.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I don't think LDG is with them though, but everybody else is.
Not.
But Rebecca, you guys have applied before, is that right?
Yep, I have. So I'm pretty familiar with it.
Okay. That will be helpful. We will not go too deeply into the nuts and bolts of how Barnes works, but we will talk a little bit about it. So, all right, can you guys see my screen here? Round 14?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right. So here's our agenda for the day. We're gonna keep it as short and sweet as possible, but we do want to have time for people to be able to ask questions. We'll talk just a second about the Barnes Fund, very little, talk a second about round 14. And then we're going to go through really how the round 14 application process works. Our process here is a little bit, well, I take that back. Our process is the same as what we do in other funding rounds, but some of our specifics are different. So when we talk about Barnes Fund, I think you guys all know that we are the Housing Trust Fund for Metro. And our goal really is to help nonprofits and their business partners create affordable housing. We do rental, homeownership, and owner-occupied rehab. Round 14 is special. It is an ARPA funding round, so American Rescue Program Act funds. What that means to you guys is that those funds are extremely focused on a deadline of the entire project and all funds expended by 12/31/26. And I'll probably hit that timeline, hit that deadline a few more times in this presentation. But round 14 really is specifically focused on a particular purpose here. So that purpose here is really working with households that are homeless, that are 30% AMI or below, and that utilize the coordinated entry process. So really critical to understand that Office of Homeless Services is going to manage that CE process or the coordinated entry process. And so as a result, that's going to, this is not going to be a project where you're going to be doing a lot of marketing and going out and qualifying renters. This is really going to be providing housing that is for the folks coming through the CE process. The two different types of projects that we can do with round 14 are permanent supportive housing with the housing first approach, which is what Metro is committed to. Or if you've got other types of projects that's still for that same population, still for 30% or below, still experiencing homelessness, still going through coordinated entry, then we could also do other deeply affordable rental programs. So like if you have, a different kind of project that isn't necessarily housing first, then you kind of fall under that deeply affordable rental. We are giving bonus points to the permanent supportive housing projects because of the fact that our city needs permanent supportive housing or PSH so much. If you are doing a PSH project, then you need to demonstrate in your application how those permanent supportive housing services will be provided. So who's going to be your service provider? What funding have you already got in place? What experience have they got? Show us your memorandum of understanding or your MOU. And then the last piece of this is that Barnes, the whole project can be mixed income, but the Barnes units have to follow the income restrictions of coordinated entry and the housing first if it's PSH. But if you have, if you've got a development that has other income levels in there, that's great. It's just that only the Barnes funding can apply to the units that meet those guidelines. We will have time at the end of all of this to ask questions. So I'm going to push through and just kind of keep us going so that we stay on track with our timeline. Okay, so Dr. Trotter, can I rely on you to talk a little bit about permanent supportive housing and coordinated entry? Or maybe more on the coordinated entry side? Oh, I think you're on mute, maybe.
Yes. Sorry. So coordinated entry, it's rooted in prevention and diversion. It's a process, not a program. A lot of people think it's a program, but it's not. And it's really a touch point where we quickly identify, assess through vulnerability score, to be ASPEDAT. And you need to have that completed to receive services. We refer and then also connect people to resources. So it's just an entry point process to connect people, identify, connect people to potential resources.
Great, thank you. And there's a lot more information here at this website address for Metro. And then we also are going to add some additional resources have OHS help us provide some additional resources on the website just in case people need to learn more. Let me go back for a moment to permanent supportive housing and housing first. So permanent supportive housing, as many of you know, is housing intervention. It is designed for folks who are currently homeless, especially those who are chronically homeless. And the idea is to help them get all the way out of homelessness and do that by providing them with services in addition to housing. And so in order to have a PSH project, you have to have the services available that are going to help them kind of be able to live long term in that facility. It is literally permanent, meaning that it's not a 30-day limit, it's not a 45-day limit or a 90-day limit where they have to then move on. This is really designed for them to be able to move into and to stay. But the housing first approach that Metro is committed to specifically says that there are no preconditions and barriers to entry. So you're not requiring that folks be drug-free. You're not requiring that folks be sober. You're not requiring that they sign up for services. This is a voluntary thing. Now, like I said, if you are offering a nonprofit, if it's a nonprofit that's offering services that do require some of those things, so if maybe it's a sober living facility, then those would fall under the deeply affordable housing side of this grant. So that's permanent supportive housing and housing first, and then coordinated entry. So let's talk a little bit about the grant itself. So we have, as you can see, there's 7.5 million. All of our projects have 20% set aside for small organizations, and those are, as you can see here, under $2 million. The maximum grant is 750. And then, but for any other application that's not coming in as a small organization, there's no maximum grant cap on this. Normally we have a $4 million grant cap. We know that this kind of project has some pretty ambitious goals. And so we don't want to limit folks to a particular grant, and we don't want to limit folks to our standard development fee. So we've increased our developer fee to 25% on this project. We have also, for those who have applied before, we've also taken off the requirement that says, tell us about your developer fee. How are you going to use it? You get extra points if you're going to use less than the maximum allowed. We took all of that off on this one. We're like, use that developer fee, make these projects work, help folks get out of homelessness, and let's just move forward on making sure that these are going to be a successful project. You are encouraged to use other funding sources. You're going to be in better shape for applying the more of those funding sources you already have lined up. I know that this is a tight turnaround with these applications. And so you may not have all of your funding lined up, but the more you can show us, yes, we've already talked to X funder, or we've already talked to X other, source of income, and here's the letter that we've got from them saying that if we're approved for Barnes, then we'll be approved for that. That's all really helpful to us. We also are making sure that people know that Barnes Fund is not providing funding for the permanent supportive housing services. So if you are partnering with somebody, or if your own agency is providing the services that you would need to be able to help folks go through their PSH, you've got to have another funding source for those services. Barnes is only for the creation of the project, of the housing piece. And you also, because the ARPA deadline of 12/31/26 is absolutely not negotiable, because these are ARPA dollars, then you need to have that funding already in place to fund the supportive services. Now, I say that's in an ideal world. If you don't have that funding in place, but you're like on the verge of it, then put that in your application. We want these projects to work, but just know that if you are just now starting the process of trying to find funding, you may not be very competitive on this. Okay, requirements, eligible applicants, as always, 501c3 nonprofit is the lead agency. If the nonprofit has at least 51% of the control of the project, then for-profit developers are welcome to partner with those nonprofits. Site control on this project is critical. You have to already have the property identified. You need to either have deed in hand or a ground lease or a signed sales contract. Again, all of this is geared toward the timeline about making sure that we can get these projects done by that 12/31/26 deadline. If you are acquiring and renovating something like a motel for PSH, and you have a sales contractor option, then that's great. But it's not something where you would want to go and use R14 funds to go and buy land to build something. It's really, again, geared toward that quick turnaround. And you have to already meet the zoning and land use requirements because, again, that's a process that can take some time. And so here is where you're going to need, as part of this application, you're going to need to have that official zoning letter from codes. And so here's the information on how you get that. Project timeline and milestones, as I said, 12/31/26. You will, if you know nothing else when you get off this call, you will know that date. One thing that's really important is if you're getting funding from someone who, from a source that requires you to do like an environmental review or something like that, you've got to show that those reviews are not going to delay your ability to meet that timeline. So just be aware of that and explain all of that in your application. For those who have not applied before, we have a lot of places where you can upload information, and some of them are uploads that we request. But you can, at any point during your application process, you can hit upload and say, you know, here's a longer explanation of where we are. I'd much rather have you guys give the additional information so that we know and our reviewers know what your project is and how you're going to make it work. Much rather have you do that than feel like you've got to be limited to a certain number of pages or words. Okay, your grant policy is actually on the Round 14 website, the application site for Barnes. It does say that there are some guidelines here about how you handle rental. We've got what the rent can be. Fair market rent is determined by HUD. If it's tenants that are not getting subsidies, if it's tenants that are getting subsidies, then you have to have the approved contract rent amount as determined by MDHA. The coordinated entry, we've got this kind of listed out here, but I think it's just important to know that that OHS is going to try to get people referred to the properties. Once the properties are all completed, we'll try to get those applicants referred to the properties within a week of vacancy, if possible. They will try to get those done. Yep, Dr. Strada, go ahead.
No, I just want to emphasize it's still a choice.
Okay. Okay.
They have to choose. It's not something that we just, hey, this is, they have to actually go through the process and choose it. We can refer, but you know, at the end, still have to choose the property.
Okay. That's a good point. And that is one thing that's a key part of coordinated entry is that y'all are offering them choices to help make things easier for them to get into housing. You're not saying you must go into this housing or this housing. So yes. Yeah, that's really, really important. Thank you for that. We do, let's see, I think that probably the most important thing the most important takeaway from this slide is read your friendly grant policy. And make sure that you're meeting whatever guidelines on rent levels from are set for MDHA and HUD, and then working with OHS. The one thing that is important here is sometimes people will say, well, how do we know if somebody's experiencing homelessness? How do we know if they've got a voucher? OHS will make sure that they have those, that they meet those guidelines, and as they are part of the coordinated entry system. All right, so as with every Barnes grant, we want to make sure that every applicant is able to carry out this project financially. Metro has specific guidelines. If your organization, this again is your lead organization, which would be your nonprofit, not your for-profit. But if your nonprofit has a budget of over $500,000, we have to have a recent audit. If they are in the $200,000 to $500,000 budget level, then they have to have CPA financials. And all organizations, regardless of their budget level, need to additionally submit that nonprofit's most recent board financials. So your nonprofit partners, for those of you who are not nonprofits, your nonprofit partners are going to be well used to providing their boards each month with a treasurer's report that says here's where our balance sheet is and our income and expense sheet. So that we need to include that as well, because it gives us a much more recent view than your audit will, which could be a year and a half old. Contract length. Metro only does 24-month contracts. We do not do longer than that. Normally, on a non-ARPA project, we might extend that contract if somebody has a delay. Again, 12/31/26, it's got to be done by then. So there will not be extensions on these contracts. Your project timeline is actually going to need to show milestones so that as we are working with you throughout this project, that we can say, hey, how are you doing on those milestones? And if you're running far behind and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to get finished in time, then we're probably going to say, okay, we need to renegotiate this and give this money to somebody else who can do it. So you just need to know that those contracts, those milestones are really, really important. Okay. Again, for those who maybe have not applied recently, Barnes now has 4 minimum standards. We call them our thresholds. If you don't meet these 4 considerations or these 4 standards, then you will not be considered in the review process. So you have to have your application complete. You have to have all the attachments that are required uploaded. You got to provide those financial documents that we just talked about. You've got to make sure that you don't have any lawsuits or outstanding safety or wage claims. Your developer fee has to be no more than 25% of the Barnes request. And then on the due diligence and site control side, you're going to need to include your design document. You're going to need to make sure that you know the code or permit regulations or the zoning regulations. You know, it's really, again, if you don't provide those things, then as the staff makes the initial review of that, then we will set it aside and say these folks did not pass the threshold phase and you will not go into the review phase. So just know that that is very serious. So here are the application instructions. Your scoring matrix, which is also on the Barnes site, Barnes application site for round 14, will tell you the point counts for each question. We used to put that in the application and in this presentation. That got a little confusing, so we're just gonna, we just list it as, go look at the scoring matrix for each question. You'll see what the point counts are. But in general, we've tried to simplify this project for, this process for easier submission this year. On the development team, experience and capacity, pretty much just know that 0 to 30% is a population that has complex needs. So proposals really need to demonstrate experience with this income range and their needs. And again, if you're doing permanent supportive housing, you've got to also include your team's experience providing those PSH services. So if you've already got your provider lined up, which we hope you do, and you've included your memorandum of understanding, you also want to include that provider as part of your team and include them in your resumes. The resumes thing, sometimes people forget. That's really important. We need to know who are the folks that are going to be leading your project so that we know what their experience is. Funding sources and uses. We had a little bit of confusion on this on the scoring matrix that we issued on June 4th. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. And so I'll get to that in just 1 minute. Developer fee, we talked about the 25% and that you will not be counted down if you're asking for the full 25%. And then due diligence and development timeline, we just talked about that. So on the scoring, on funding sources and uses, this is the clarification on the matrix. We originally, unfortunately, had two scoring levels on the matrix that were the same wording right next to each other, and it was confusing. So this is the clarification, and this has been fixed on the scoring matrix that's on the website. But if you downloaded it on the very first day on June 4th, then you'll want to go back and re-download the scoring matrix. But basically, you'll get 10 points is available to those who are asking for no more than 50% of the total project budget, and you have committed funding for the balance. 7 points is those who are asking for no more than 50%, but they have part of the funding balance is committed, up to 40%, and then, or at least 40%. And then 5 points is if you have no more than 50% of the total project budget, but you've only got 25% of the remaining project balance. And then 0 to 3% is really, sorry, let me go back there. 0 to 3 points is if you're asking for more than 50%. And then the question of whether or not you've got your other funding lined up. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but if you have questions, let us know. As we'll talk about in the timeline section, you are allowed to ask questions through Monday, this coming Monday, and you'll email those questions to us and we'll give you that information, and then we'll post all the answers to the questions on the 24th. But we will also answer you back by email as soon as you submit the question. Evaluation criteria. Once we get into doing the application review, this is the section in which we are doing external reviewers. So here we're looking for the project approach. You telling us, how are you going to do this? How's this all going to work? We do ask that you, instead of marketing, since you're not actually going to be out there marketing to folks, we want to know what your training on fair housing has been. How are you going to let your tenants know about their fair housing rights? What are you going to do in terms of folks that maybe don't, that have limited English proficiency? How's that going to work? The next thing is on participant engagement. Tell us how you're going to educate your tenants. Again, 0 to 30% income range, AMI have special specific needs, and you need to make sure that there's somebody on your team who can help them understand how renting is going to work. Sorry about this line, the affordability window of 30 years of rehab lien. That's not something that the tenants need to understand. That is left over from another presentation, but you as a nonprofit need to understand that you're making this property available and you're committing that you're going to use it for this purpose for the next 30 years. That if you ever sell this project, then it's got to be sold to somebody else who's going to continue using it in the same way. That affordability window of 30 years is part of the price of getting a Barnes Fund grant. Project design, again, here's pretty clear here, just making sure that you include your design plans, that you're looking at visitability and inclusive design. We do have a list on the universal design checklist, which you need to include with your application, and you have to show what are the different things that you're going to commit to. Mark everything on that list that you're going to do, and then that'll help us give you a good score on that. Sustainability and resilience. You guys know as well as I do that Nashville has a particular attraction for disasters. We have a lot of natural disasters here. We've certainly had our share of human as well. So think about, we've got things like extreme heat. Those are also on the disaster level, even though we don't necessarily think of it that way. Look at how your housing is going to be built to really think about environmental impacts. Think about withstanding weather events. If you're doing, if you're doing a motel and you're going to do your property, or you're going to do your units, then what are you going to do when there's a storm? Is there somewhere there in the facility that folks can go if there's a tornado? So make sure that you've got air conditioning in every room, things like that. So that's pretty clear. Access to transit is also a question, and this, hopefully, as you already know, is crucial for 0 to 30% AMI households. They need to be able to get to public transit. It needs to be walkable, or they need to have shuttles to the bus stop, or they need to have a subsidy for bus passes. Whatever that looks like, just don't put your folks in a situation where they can't get to food, they can't get to education, they can't get to employment because they can't succeed if that's the case. So that's really important. So, and we will ask you lots of questions, or we will ask you several questions about that. And please tell us, if you guys have given a lot of thought to that, put that information in your application. And then when we come to bonus points, the bonus points are an effort to make sure that the priorities that the Housing Trust Fund Commission has set for this particular funding round, that those are given particular attention. So in the area of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, everybody has to, no matter whether you get bonus points for this or not, but everybody has to provide their DEAI checklist. It basically says for the nonprofit, tell us who all you serve, tell us about your board. Does your board reflect the faces of the population that you serve? But if a nonprofit is doing a good job with that, then we want to also give you bonus points. Same thing with permanent supportive housing. As I said, there are bonus points available for that because we need that so badly in Nashville. Urban zoning overlay, we've got details on how to find out if you're in an UZO, but it really is just looking at high need access to housing. And then promotion of healthy communities. If you have a special focus on how you're going to help your residents stay healthy, physical, behavioral health, whatever those are, if you've got a local clinic that you've partnered with, that you've got folks coming over and doing screenings, if you've got, if you've got walking paths, whatever it is that you're doing, and especially if you've met with your residents, you've met with the community or public health professionals, we want to know that that's where those things are coming from, because engagement is so important to us. All right, and we're almost done, guys. Scoring and resources. These are all of the items that are on the Barnes 14 application webpage. The scoring matrix, as I said, is for this particular grant is just one document because we just have the one kind of grant. The application link is on that page, and all the required uploads are on the page. The uploads are also within the application, so you can access those a couple of different ways. The timeline is that you've got, this is the second of the information sessions through June 19th, which is tomorrow. I was thinking that was next Monday, so sorry. If you've got questions, email them to barnesfund@nashville.gov. Send them to us today or tomorrow by noon, and and that includes anything that you ask on this call. If you want them to be, we'd like for you to include any questions that you've got on this call and send them to that email address so that we can answer them. And then on the 24th, we'll also post all of the answers on the Barnes Round 14 website. Applications will be due on July 15th. Again, the goal of this is to make sure that we're meeting that ARPA deadline. We'll do our review period, internal and external, through August 21st. Our goal would be that the Housing Trust Fund Commission would have their vote on recommendations on August 27th. And then, excuse me, that could possibly go to September, depending on if we have any delays. And then we'll have presentation for council approval in October, November. The way that Barnes works is that the reviewers make the recommendation, the Housing Trust Fund approves the recommendations, and then recommends the awards, which then goes to council Metro Council to actually be approved for contracts. So that's kind of the way that works. And then anybody who does not get funded can certainly ask to meet with staff to get information about why that didn't go through or what your challenges were, so that you can be more competitive in future rounds. But that's after the council approval. So that's where we are. Excuse me, let me get back onto the screen so I can see people's faces. There we go. Okay, a lot of information. As I said, all of this will be available on the website. So, questions from folks?
Yes, thank you very much. Is there a dollar amount per dedicated unit that y'all have in mind?
There's not. We do ask as part of your application that you tell us what your Barnes investment per unit would be. And then basically you're just going to say, you know, we're doing X number of units that are going to be Barnes funded. We're asking for X amount of dollars and just divide that out. So we do look at that. That is certainly one of the. Just a second, are you guys still there?
Mhm.
Okay, don't know what I just got. Okay, so we do look at that when the reviewers go through, but there's not like a particular number that we're looking for.
Thank you. For the universal design checklist, there are going to be some units that are ADA compliant and some that aren't. For the
Okay.
ones that are ADA compliant, they will conform with more of the universal design standards.
Mm-hmm.
Should we say that we are complying with universal design standards if we are complying in the ADA units, or do we only say yes, that we're complying with the universal design standards if every single unit in the community complies? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. I'm gonna give you my opinion and then see if Rashida has anything to add to that. As a grant administrator, my opinion on that, Ryan, would be tell us in your comments. Like you can even upload a separate page that says what we're looking at is X number of units will be ADA compliant, and so they will have these items, and then those that are not would not have X, Y, or Z, so that you've got enough information in there that our reviewers can read them. They do look at all of the attachments. They do look at the things that you send us. So I would say if you are having some of your units meet those guidelines, I would mark that on the universal checklist. Rashida, do you are do you have
Agree.
a different perspective or yeah? Okay.
No, I don't. I think that's good advice.
Okay.
Thank you. That is super helpful. Can we use cash flow from the revenue received from the property to help pay for supportive services at the property?
That is a really good question, and I would ask that you send that to that question to the Barnes Fund at nashville.gov right after this call. My guess is that yes, some portion of that of the spinoff from the from cash flow would make sense to put into the supportive services. But if you'll ask that question, we'll find out from somebody who would know.
Thank
Unless
you.
April, do you already know that off the, as I'm gonna put you on the spot, do you already know that off the top of your head?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I would hope that we can use that money because that's money that we're not going to distribute.
Right.
So, I mean,
Can you ask the question one more time? Sorry.
sure. May we use, so we're going to have rents coming in to the property and we pay the expenses. And then what we would like to do is use some of the money before we distribute it to pay for additional support services at the property. And I just wanted to make sure that that was okay. Which I assume it
Absolutely.
would. Yeah, I assume it would be because it's basically
Yeah.
we either take the money and we either get the money or we use it to improve the
Yeah.
property. So
And you're you would be partnering with a nonprofit, and so either way, just as long as you can track your spendings, then I think that's appropriate.
okay,
You
and
wanna
then
make- Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. Let me just add, you want to make sure that you have multiple ways to pay for that, because in case your rent projections are low, including vacancy rate or whatever, you don't want your other folks that are living there to not get the services they need. So I think that's the only thing, is just make sure you've got multiple ways to cover that.
that is a great point and actually leads into my next question, which is, can we use some of the developer fee to pay for the startup of the support services for the property? And I hope you don't feel like I know that the Barnes money can't go to support services,
Right.
but but this is money that would otherwise go as a developer fee. For exactly that
Again-
reason, because I'm worried about having money. I just want to make sure, just like you said, there's
Right.
plenty of money to make sure, especially during the transition process, which is the most important time for the property, that there's plenty of money to pay for any additional support services we might need.
Sure. Here's, again, I'm going to give you my answer. Anybody else is welcome to jump in. And then if you'll send that question right after this call to our email, then we'll get you an answer. My understanding is that unlike in the past where we've asked for detailed description of how you're going to use your developer fee, this time we're not asking that. That's 25% of the property of the project, sorry, 25% of the project of your ask. And that's 25% of Barnes ask, not 25% of your total project cost. But yeah, 25% of your Barnes ask is going to the developer fee. From our perspective, whatever you need to use that money for to make your project work, that's yours. That's up to you. So I would say that that's not something that we would pull away from. So that's my opinion. Again, if anybody else sees that differently, then speak up. Okay. But yeah, Brian, send that to us right after, and we'll get you a more definitive answer than just my opinion.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, just send it over to the email address, and we'll confirm. It's what Karen said sounds reasonable, but we just need to check and make sure.
But it's ARPA, so who knows?
Yeah.
We'll just check and make sure that actually is true.
Thank you. And last question. And when do you think the money would actually be, if we are awarded the money, when do you think the money would be actually funded?
Yeah, how this generally works is that, let's say if we get all of the applications reviewed, if the Housing Trust Fund Commission is able to make their vote on August 27th, as I've got in the timeline, just let's say that yes, they are. And then we get all the contracts written, and then we get it to the council. Let's say we're going to get it to them in October. Could be November, but let's say in October. As soon as the council approves the contract, that contract is live. And at that point, then the funding is available. Now, keep in mind, though, that our funding is reimbursement. So it is not, we're not giving you the money on the front end. We are providing it to you for expenses that you've spent. If you're doing your money for acquisition of properties, what we have done, what we can look into is, do we need to set up an escrow agreement so that the money can go into an escrow fund that you can use for acquisition? So we just need to talk that through with you. But anything other than the acquisition would need to be reimbursement for money that you've already spent.
Thank you very much for those clarifications, and I'll email you those.
Okay, great. Anybody else have questions? Brian's already asked all the hard ones. You guys are just going to bail on me, aren't you? All right. Well, if you have questions, as we said, send the questions to barnesfund@nashville.gov, and we will answer them as quickly as we can, and then we will publish all of those answers from your questions and also from the questions that have been asked by any other applicant over the last 2 weeks. We will get all of that up on the website by the 24th, actually on the 24th. And then I think that's it. Rashida, April, Dr. Trotter, anybody have things that we need to include that we didn't mention already?
I think there were a couple organizations that were not with Adam. If they'd like additional information, just feel free to reach out, send an email, and we'll answer what questions we can.
Yeah, if you'll do it through that public through the Barnes thing, then we will forward those questions on to OHS if needed, and that way that again those answers also will be shared with everybody.
Right.
Perfect. All right, guys, you get to have 13 minutes back of your day. So we'll talk to everybody soon. And if you have questions, just let us know. Thanks. Good luck.
Thank you.